right. Well, good morning, or no, good afternoon. Gosh, I don't even know what time of day it is today. Thanks so much for having us. As Emily mentioned, my name is Kelle Marsalis, and I am with the Plano, Texas Chamber. And it's my honor to serve as co-chair of the Chamber of the Year program with my colleague, Candace Boothby. Also joining us on the call today is Will Burns from ACCE, Will will cover some things about the dynamic benchmarking survey. And then another one of our esteemed former winners, Adrian Kane with the Charleston, South Carolina Chamber, will be joining us a little later in the call to add his perspective as well. So the Chamber of the Year Award has been around since 2007, and over the past couple of years especially, we've witnessed chambers really step up to the plate to impact lives and livelihoods across the country. And today we're going to cover kind of the purpose, process, and impact of applying for and ultimately winning Chamber of the Year. So before I turn it over to Candace to kick us off, I do want to just kind of reiterate what Emily mentioned, and that we encourage questions throughout the presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the chat box, and we will kind of try to answer them as we go, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well. But we love to answer your questions. So Candace, I'm going to go ahead and let you kick it off.
Thanks, Kelle. I know this is always like a favorite time of the year for us when we get to start sharing our favorite ACCE project. So I am Candace Boothby, and I'm with the Newnan-Coweta Chamber in Georgia. We're about 30 minutes south of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of what you're going to see in the next couple of slides. We're going to walk you through the application process and key dates. And then we have Will, who's going to share a little bit about the dynamic benchmarking survey. We'll talk through some qualification requirements, give you a little insider's perspective, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the impact on your organization and why this award is so very important. So let's go to the process, shall we? So there are 4 steps in the award process, and the first one is the dynamic chamber benchmarking survey, which pre-qualifies you. There are, I think it's 4 of 6 criteria that you have to achieve in order to be eligible then to actually apply. There's the application process, which is a fun process, because for those of you that have gone through like accreditation, it's a great self-reflection, self-awareness exercise. It also gives you an opportunity to see maybe where some of your gaps are that perhaps need closing or enhancing. And then there's the interview stage, where we interview the top 3 chambers in each category. And from those interviews, then the actual winners are selected in each category, and that takes us to the awards section, and those are announced annually at the ACCE convention. So I will just reiterate what Kelle said a moment ago, though. We've worked a lot on this process since 2007 and streamlining it, and especially with the last few years with COVID, really with an eye to relevancy for today's chambers and leadership within the community and change makers as well. So you can see in front of you the timeline and the key dates to mark on your calendar. So April 1st is the deadline to complete your dynamic benchmarking survey. And again, Will's going to share a little bit about that. April 11th is when you would pre-qualify. We would notify those who have actually pre-qualified. They've met the 4 of the 6 criteria in the survey. Then April 26th, we have a webinar scheduled where we're going to go over the do's and the don'ts to help you out with your application. And on the 29th, we're going to actually, this is optional, but I would highly advise you to take advantage of any information that ACCE provides to help you with your synopsis. Not just choosing your synopsis, but also how do you package it and what are the judges looking for. March 10th is the actual application deadline. I'm sorry, May 10th. I'm going backwards, May 10th. And then the judges will then judge between May 11th and May 20th. And Kelly's going to review a little bit about the judging process in a few moments. May 25th, we will announce our finalists. And then June 21st, we will interviews that win the webinar. What is that, Kelly? Interviews that win webinar?
That's a webinar for the qualifiers
Yeah.
in kind of going through the interview process.
To prepare them to be the best possible interviewees as they can, right? And then July 26th are in-person interviews at the ACCE convention in Indianapolis. So just kind of mark those dates on your calendar. They're very, very important. And don't let any of this scare you because we're going to help you. We've got tools along the way. It's a big job, but it's manageable. You can do this. We're going to give you tips to show you how you can organize yourself and use your existing resources. And there's lots of people out there that are willing to help you and be a part of your process and eager to make sure that you position yourself for success. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Will, who's going to walk you through the dynamic chamber benchmarking.
Thank you, Candace. And once again, we'll reiterate the deadline for getting your operation survey data into the dynamic chamber benchmarking platform is April 1st. So you have until April 1st to get that information in. Next slide, Kel. And you can do that by visiting benchmarking.acce.org. And if you need help getting logged onto the platform, I just pasted my email address in the chat. I'm happy to get you situated with an account to ensure that you can get in there. Once you log in, you'll see that there are two surveys. There's operations survey and the salary survey. The operations survey is the key piece for the April 1st deadline. You have to complete that survey in order to pre-qualify for Chamber of the Year. Now, we are going to publish a salary survey this fall. So we do encourage you while you're in there to also complete the salary survey. We've received lots of inquiries about benchmarking salaries through the Great Resignation and all of the workforce issues that chambers are dealing with. So complete them both, but the April 1st deadline is specific to the operations survey. And then next slide.
Did I miss one?
Yeah.
Where did it go?
And it's okay, you can go back.
Okay,
and then
I'm sorry.
As part of the operations survey, there are three elements. There's the chamber profile, the finance report, or the finance survey, and the membership survey. So be sure to complete all three of those to qualify. And in the very first screen of the chamber profile, you'll see this question. So just indicate yes as you're completing those questions, and we'll know that you're interested in applying for Chamber of the Year. And then next slide. And then in addition to Chamber of the Year qualification, by entering your data into dynamic chamber benchmarking, I just wanted to reiterate the value that you can get out of the system. So there are a series of PowerPoint presentations you can use for board strategic planning initiatives. There's a chamber report card that runs through lots of different metrics and benchmarking. So there's a great deal of value, and it's all free for those who complete the survey. So just wanted to indicate that it's more than just a Chamber of the Year qualification mechanism. And then the next slide will cover the qualification criteria. So you must meet 3 of the 5 qualification criteria, which is positive net income, the current ratio, dollar retention, account retention. So retention in dollars, retention in number of members, and then your total net assets minus liabilities must be equal to or greater than or exceed 0. So the retention numbers will be determined by the median of all people who complete dynamic chamber benchmarking. So we'll know that percentage after we get everyone's data in there. The positive net income is exactly as it sounds. And let's see, assets and liabilities must result in a ratio of 1.0 or greater. So those are the qualification criteria that you have to meet, and everyone who meets that will be alerted by ACCE and invited to apply for Chamber of the Year. And now I'll hand it back to Kelly.
Thank you. Yes, so just to reiterate, April 11th is, by that date is when everybody will be notified if they qualified, and then we will have that first specific webinar on April 26th that goes through the application. We're going to break it down, talk about tips and tricks for each section, but I am going to give you a little bit of an overview now. So one of the other areas is that you've probably seen that the Chamber of the Year award is in 4 distinct categories. And so the operations data also determines your competition category. And so that's typically categories 1 through 4. There's several data points that go into it. The major ones include population, your number of businesses in your area, your total revenue, percentage of revenue that's restricted, and your number count or member count, total number of members. There's also, if you look here, this is kind of a rough breakdown of those data points, but again, depending on the data that's collected and through the operation survey, there's a little bit of a curve, so that will determine the final breakdown. I will say ACCE is very careful to make sure chambers are competing against peers and take into account some data points like number of employees, location, and some other things to kind of make the final determination. So let's talk a little bit about the application breakdown. It's really comprised of 4 primary sections, which you can see on the screen. But I'd like to focus mostly today on just some information about the synopses, since they're really the most important section, and you'll kind of hear why in a second, and the short answer. And so the synopses should illustrate your story as a chamber and be 2 signature programs that really demonstrate your relevancy and impact. They need to be programs that have been implemented within the past 2 to 3 years and have measurable results already. So I can say, first off, if it's something you've just implemented and you don't really have a lot of results, it's not going to score very well. So you want to make sure that you're choosing things that you can show not only the need, the process, why, what your chamber did to implement, and then the measurable results. And the synopses are very important because they do account for 2/3 of the total application score. You do have, we mentioned this a minute ago, Candace did, you have the option to submit your synopses topics to the judges ahead of time to get feedback and ensure you're on the right track. And I believe the link to do that will be provided on the Chamber of the Year website pretty soon. There is a deadline to do that, which I think was in that list of deadlines, so we can review that again at the end. But I really highly recommend taking advantage. I think Candace and I have both served as judges in the past, and we can probably agree that we might have a fantastic application, but the synopses are maybe not as competitive with some of the other applications. And so we kind of thought, gosh, I just wish we could have said, hey, don't do this, maybe focus on some of these other areas. And so this is an opportunity to just kind of give some feedback. And the other thing is, and we'll mention this a few times, go and look at some of the winning applications from previous years and see the types of programs that they submitted. Now, for the short answers, which is another major portion of the application, this is where you really cover a lot of your operations, membership, governance, and they really need to be concise and well written. Be sure that each answer is written from the same point of view as every other part of the application. I know Candace will talk probably a little bit more about this as we go, but if you have multiple people working on multiple areas of the application and you don't put it into kind of one voice before it comes to judges, it's very obvious and it doesn't usually score as well. And you need to make sure that you fully answer the question, but don't go too overboard. There is a limited amount of characters, I believe, limited space. So be clear, concise, direct, And consider what you're putting in the response. You know, tell us a great story, not tons of bullets of information that's really traditional or just kind of meeting the minimum requirements. How is your approach different and proven? What has the impact been? How has it surprised you? Does it delight your member? You know, you hear surprise and delight your members. You know, is there evidence of that? And use examples if the space allows. I think that's always a really good addition, is if you can explain your answer and kind of give an example in that allotted space, it really helps kind of demonstrate what you're trying to say. And so then after the application, the next phase, so once your application has been judged, you will find out if you are a finalist. And you will also get feedback from your application. So if you don't qualify as a finalist, you will be able to receive some feedback on maybe why your application didn't quite make it to the interview stage, or where are some areas that you could improve upon. And I will say, take those notes to heart and do apply again if that happens, because I think there are lots and lots of examples in the you know, decade-long plus long history of this award where chambers applied multiple times before they were recognized. So with the interviews, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail because we will have an opportunity for that in the next couple of webinars. But I do want you to understand a few pieces of it. First, the interview is in person, live in Indianapolis, with a panel of three to four peers, board members, and former winners. You may see CEOs, staff, etc. So be prepared to make sure that you're kind of talking about your chamber in ways that really any level of professional would understand. Each chamber that's invited to interview is allowed to bring 2 people into the interview room. Typically, that's the CEO and either another staff member or a volunteer like your board chair. I would say that's one of the #1 things you want to pay attention to when you're thinking ahead about your interview, is who you're going to bring into that interview room. You'll be asked about 10 to 12 questions over a 45-minute span. Make sure the people in that interview know your chamber inside and out, know the application materials inside and out, and really kind of complement each other. Both people should talk equally. Egos need to be checked at the door. Think about the story you're trying to tell and have someone that really complements that story. If your application and your synopses really focus on your DE&I work, have a diverse representation in that room, or have individuals that can really talk about why it's important. If you focus on economic development, you know, make sure you have somebody in that room that really can talk about the impact of that as well. Okay, so a little bit about the judges, and I know we have some questions coming in, so I'll look at those in just a second. But as I mentioned earlier, the judges are chamber CEOs and staff of winning chambers, chamber veterans, and ACCE board members. They are peers in the industry, and they are volunteering their time. And so they take it very, very seriously. I can attest to that. I have witnessed hours and hours and hours of discussion on applications in years past. So they do take it very seriously. And it's a really comprehensive and fair process, because ACCE does a great job of making sure that the judging panel has a great cross section of those categories. The applications themselves will be judged virtually, meaning that those judges will be doing it from their home offices, but interviews are required in person at the conference, as I mentioned. And judges on the interview panel will have judged and are familiar with your application. So you're not going to be walking into a group of people that have not read and know your application very well. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to hand it back over to Candace to kind of talk about some of her tips and tricks and kind of the reality of the application process. And then I know she's going to invite Adrian to say a few words as well.
Yes, so you're actually going to hear Kelly and I repeat some of the same things throughout the webinar, because that's intentional. We want you to pick up on the things that are important. And you know what they say, you have to hear things, what is it, 7 to 9 things before you hear it. So one of the very most important things is for the CEO to be integrally involved in this, but to also have staff involved in it as well. So having a plan is important. The entire process is about a 4-month long process. So I think for us, at least, dividing out various pieces to the application with different staff members is always a good idea. Kelly touched on the tone. So it is very important for your copy to be written in the active voice versus passive voice. Give it a little energy with your energetic verbs, and having the consistency of tone. So regardless of who actually crafts each section, somebody, maybe a writer that you have or somebody who is very good with active voice, maybe taking the end product and ensuring that it sounds like it's written from the same organization, the same person perhaps. We all have great stories to tell. In the last few years have changed our narratives. So, Kelly talked a little bit about the synopses. It's very important that you choose something where you're able to demonstrate impact, where you're actually making a difference. And I know, Kelly, I love what you just said about the diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you have that as one of your synopses, that might be a good individual who focuses in that area on your judging panel. So be thinking about the seamlessness of the process and how it all connects to each piece, because in reality, you're actually telling a complete story from your application, well, from your data to the application to the actual interview. Kelly mentioned there's some word limits, so you want to pay attention to that. I believe, Kelly, there's some sections that are 300 words. There might be one that's 150 words, if I remember correctly. The other thing is you don't want to overload the judges. Don't make your judges work. So if it asks you for an example of something, just limit yourself to, if it says 1 or if it says 2, limit it to your 2 best or your 1 best. There's also 2 years ago, we started requiring that applications come in a PDF format. And I don't know, Kelly, if you want to say anything about that, but we have had chambers, whether it's through somebody, a volunteer who's willing to do some pro bono work, or it's somebody that you hire. There's somebody in your sphere that can help you understand if you don't know how to put a document like this in PDF for you to do that. And then your links are embedded within the PDF document. Kelly, you want to say anything about that piece?
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most underrated pieces of this process is look at some of the past examples, especially the last few years, the winning applications, and see the way that they link documents and embed examples. Because when we're as judges going through, anywhere between 8 and 15 applications a piece, and it takes a couple hours per application to really fully judge it, it's very difficult when you have to switch back and forth between documents and things don't link and we have to search for things. There's been examples when you've had to create, in the synopses, it asks for a program budget and it just says program budget is included in chamber budget. Well, then I have to go back and look through the chamber budget and find that line item. And by then I'm frustrated to the point where I'm like, I'm not going to score this as high. So, really kind of pay attention to that. And we've had a lot of chambers that have hired a firm to help them with this piece, hired a contract person, found someone at a local university that's really good at it. So, just leave yourself enough time in the process to test again, send it to someone that's not on your network, test it again, and then test it another time. And there will be, in the application webinar, we will go into a lot of detail on how you upload it and kind of walk through that process. And then just real quick before we go back, the only thing I was going to add about the synopses is when you're kind of thinking about, I just lost it. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Candace. I completely lost my train of thought.
About that, I do that all the
It'll
time.
come back. It'll come back to me.
Who I am these days, right? So just don't let the process concern you. It's an opportunity for you to tell your story and shine in front of your peers. That's the most important thing, and learn a little bit about some self-awareness about yourself. So we're going to go to the next slide, which talks about experience, qualifier, and winner. So each stage of the application process, there's impact. There are things that you learn about yourself. So please take each of these stages very seriously and use it as a tool for self-improvement. This whole process gives you an opportunity to see how you stack up against other organizations, so you can identify best practices or learn from others to continue your continuous journey of growing. The other thing that I think is very important is the board involvement piece. While they may not actually be involved in the application piece, keeping them aware of the process and maybe even getting them to perhaps give input into some of the answers is always helpful, because it shows that there's a partnership between staff and leadership. But at the end of the day, they're as eager as you are to see if you stack up with others and to look at others that are in the top echelon of the industry. And of course, winning means a lot to your community and gives you credibility and long-standing rah-rah. We have with us a special individual who is going to share with us a little bit about a recent experience. I'm trying to think, was Charleston last year, Adrian, or 2 years ago?
It was 2018. I had to go back and look, actually.
Oh, it was 18. Okay.
Well, because the pandemic deletes 2 years.
Exactly,
so, yeah,
right. And
like
I do recall Charleston's won twice, have they not?
No, actually, we've not, just once. Well, now maybe way back when we did, Candace. Maybe we did.
Yeah. So you're going to share a little bit about your story as far as like what it meant to you to be a winner, and maybe any insights you have from the actual application process.
Great. Thank you, Candace, Kelly, Emily, and Will, for all that you guys do. And so I want to reiterate a couple things before I share about the impact. We were a chamber that, so I've been here 7 years. So I guess in my cycle, we applied twice. And I think I want to reiterate that we were not successful our first time. And I think that first time provided a great deal of lessons learned as to how we could hone our proposal. And Kelly was actually on both of our interviews. I think I may be allowed to say that, Kelly. But one of the direct feedbacks, to her point about feedback, that we got was, my CEO is a really excitable guy, and he was excited to be there. The first time he did a lot of the talking. And I think that we did not have the interplay that we developed then very intentionally the second time. So when we went into that second interview, the two of us were prepared, and I was his partner in both of those instances. We were prepared to share 50-50. And while we both had fluency equally, I think the committee the second go around could really see that and see the passion we each brought to it. So I would, and having participated as a judge once before, I would caution you to something else I wanted to reiterate that I think it's important to say. I've seen board members participate in interviews. I've seen staff members participate in interviews. And while no assumption is true in every case, I'm going to just give you my feedback, is that unless you have an exceptional board director, it is not a good idea to have your board director with you. And that is a gross generalization that is Adrian Kane's opinion. May not be that of ACC's, but I'm going to give you my opinion. Because here's why. There's no one that can speak to your work or speak to your staff's work as passionately and as fluently as the people doing it. Now, if you're a smaller chamber, you may have that board director that is able to do that for you. What I have seen oftentimes is board directors that are not quite able to carry half that conversation, that they may be but dynamic business leaders, but they're not chamber leaders. And so I think that's an important distinction. Again, Adrian Kane's opinion. So what did it mean for us? I think that's what I'm supposed to talk about. So we've leveraged it a couple different ways. And Candace, we actually didn't. And this was a conscious decision on our part. It was interesting to hear you talk about it. We did not actively share to our board that we were applying. And that was a conscious decision on the part of our chamber. Now we're a large metro chamber and 70 board directors. And I think that part of it was they knew we were applying, but it was not an active ongoing conversation. What we did instead, and this is the other thing I would encourage you all to do, once you know what category you're in, and we did this, I would build 2 to 3 peer chambers that are not also going for Chamber of the Year, that you can use as your internal safe review panel. These are folks that you know well enough, maybe someone on this call, past Chamber Award Year Award winner, that's willing to take a look at your application, that's willing to quiz you and practice. That's the other thing is our second go around, we set very intentional. We had 6 practice sessions where we practiced and we had different interviewers interview Brian and I based on the questions that we thought might be asked from our first interview. So my urge to everyone is be intentional with your preparation. Don't take it for granted, because that's going to yield better results as you go. Now, and I was trying to share a screen and I don't have the ability, it doesn't matter. I was going to show a picture of that night. We had 4 crystal big trophies in front of us. And what we did is a very intentional, I think it was Chattanooga. No, it was Indy. We looked at what another major Category 4 chamber had done in leveraging the winning of the award. And we built a social media and a campaign following that. I also would say, and Will, you can do this, we're still Chamber of the Year because we still use the logo at the right time throughout PowerPoints, throughout presentations of the community. We just dropped that it was 2018. We're just permanently Chamber of the Year. It's your community. You can do whatever you want with that thing, because we were in 2018. So what I would say is we have been able to pull that through all of our work. When we do a major presentation we get a lot of intercity visits or leadership visits to Charleston. I guarantee you it's on every one of those slides, as well as our 5-star accreditation from the U.S. Chamber. It's one of those things that we list. That first year that you receive it, be very intentional with how you come back to your community. I think you're going to have a flashpoint of opportunity with your press. You're going to have a flashpoint of opportunity on social media and with your board to synergize that opportunity. And so that's the other thing I would use that to stage that interaction very intentionally. Build it so the minute you get that award that night, we had people back home that were ready to start social media posting it. So there was no surprise. We seamlessly went in from winning, being announced, to then it being posted out on our social media. And so I would encourage you all to act like you're going to win. You're not going to go through this rather long process and not think that you're going to win. So go ahead and plan for that intentionality with that campaign. Stretch it out all year long in a very deliberate way, and then don't ever let go of it. And that's what I would say to you in terms of how we've leveraged it for us. I'm happy to answer any questions, but that's sort of how we approached it, and we layered it, right? We had some interviews with our CEO, with news outlets, we had social media, and a campaign that followed all year long. Something else I want to circle back to, Candace, that struck me when you said it. While you want to have uniformity in your writing and proposal, I encourage you all, do not put this all on one staff member. Build a team around the application process. A team that's going to meet in a regular cadence, hold each other accountable. It's a lot of work. Now it's worth it, and you'll learn a great deal about yourself and your organization by doing it. And I really firmly believe that. But if you put it all in one person, it's too much, especially with the other jobs they do. We had internal capacity. We did not have to hire an outside firm for hours, but that's one part of that example. Other thing is, in judging, I found it fascinating. Sometimes the folks that would come in, they'd come in and they brought, there's one chamber particularly, this beautiful book of their community. They talked about all the impact. And I was struck, I was sitting next to Kelly on this interview. I said, why didn't they put that in their application? So when you come to your application, put everything into it and make it easy for the judges to read, because that's what you're going to be judged on. And make sure you bring a couple extra copies, give them to your judges. They probably won't have time to read it there, but they're going to look back at it as you mention things as they finish their scoring process. So just think through those things as you go through that process. So I rambled a little bit, Kelly and Candace, but my takeaways is be intentional, build a team around you, both internal and external. Don't be afraid to reach out to folks on this call, to Will, to Kelly, myself and Candace, to say, hey, would you mind reviewing our application as we move through this? Make sure you go to your peer chambers, because that's who you're going to be judged against. Those are the folks that know your chamber and the size and the scope of your work the best that you can do. So those are a couple things that I would take away.
So Adrian, that was great information. I think we're going to put you on the circuit every year from now on. One thing we haven't mentioned is the Horizon Initiative. There, you will see that addressed throughout the application. So be thinking about the work that you do and where it aligns with which Horizon Initiative. That's very important. And also, you want to be well versed on those when you go into your interview, because there may be a question about that. You don't know.
And
But
Candace, let me jump in on that, because we actually referenced in Horizons, blah, blah, blah. You'll see that the work correlated to that. So don't think you're being cheesy, because actually the judges know their Horizons work, and you're tying it back to that. That's a really important point, Candace, is don't take for granted the work that ACCE does to align with the work that we do as chambers, and pull that into your proposal.
Absolutely. So, and listening to Adrian, I have a little bit of a different story. So, I have the privilege of having a really super duper former board chair. So, Kelly, she's shaking.
Yeah.
Kelly was actually on my panel as well. This guy is amazing. And so, I knew that if there was one person I needed to bring, it was him, because he's so smart, and he's like my go-to person if I want to measure something, or if I want to drill down into a topic. And Kelly, he knew our stuff as well as we knew it, didn't he? Yes. If you have someone like that, feel free to bring that person with you. It definitely shows a different type of partnership that you have. And Mark and I, that was my super duper volunteer, we did do a lot of practicing. We had a lot of sessions where we just grilled each other and we went over topics and, tried to come up with, I remember waiting for the interview, and there was somebody else waiting for their interview, and they had actually sunk a ship off the coast of the Gulf Coast, and then they had turned it into a tourist destination. And I remember Mark and I looking at each other going, oh my goodness, well, we didn't sink a ship. Wow, would we stand a chance? But that's very important. And then also on the winning side, because when you do get to that point, just remember that it does give you credibility in the community. It is a sales tool. It helps you market. When you have new companies that come into the community, it's important to share that. And just like Adrian, you guys still use your logo, we do as well, because you always can claim that, as a win. And then, going back to the application, though, I did mention just keep it consistent, keep the tone consistent, and just watch your grammar. If you have misspelled words or inconsistent kinds of sentences, the judges will take off for that. And Kelly is a really hard judge. So Kelly, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just echo, I've been with 2 chambers that have won and have qualified, and yes, you use that distinction forever. And I have to say, even being a qualifier in the final round is a great distinction, because you are among a very slim margin of chambers that make it to that step. A couple of things just kind of to add. I was actually prepared to talk about Candace's board chair, and Adrian, I agree. I've seen it both ways. I have seen board chairs that come in and it is a mistake to have had them, and then Candace, I think your former chair is really the exception. I think he could have handled the interview completely on his own. And that is very impressive when you have a board chair that can really, I'm not gonna lie, it is an impressive factor, but it's a little bit of a risk, because they have to be able to really get in there and complement what you're talking about and know their stuff. And we're not all as lucky every year to have that. So, just choose wisely. A couple of other things that popped into my head is, and I did remember my point that I forgot earlier, is last year, I think in the synopses, the application required one of the synopses to focus on a COVID-related program or response. And I don't believe that is a requirement any longer, but I will say the programs that you submit should not only be kind of your signature starring thing that you're known for, they should be relevant as well. And so if it's something that's if you're completely ignoring things that are happening in the world, it might seem a little like one of them should be pretty current event focused or current challenge in your community focus. So just kind of keep that in mind. And then kind of the last thing is that one of the things that we really like to talk about when we talk about this award, even years later, is that this is selected by your peers. So this is almost, it's kind of one of those things like you watch on the award shows for television and movies. You know, it's amazing to be accredited, and it's amazing to do these different things. But when you're selected by your peers, I think it really means a lot as well, because you're really demonstrating that impact that others are attesting for you. So all great things. Well, let's see. I think we have just a couple of minutes. It looks like most of the questions in the chat have been answered. There's been some questions about where to access samples of winning applications, and we're working on getting, Will and ACC staff are looking at getting some more examples posted once we get permission. The other thing you can do is look back at that list of past winners. I think it goes back several years, and reach out to the chambers themselves. I still get lots of chambers that reach out to me asking for feedback and tips, like Adrian said, or asking to look at our application, and I'm always happy to share that. So if you're able to kind of see, yes, we can make the slides available after, along with the recording. And then Megan, hi Megan, she asked, are there any mock interview questions included with previous winners or on the ACC website? I don't believe there has been, but that is something that we could look into. So let me get back to you on that question. Keep watching the ACC, the Chamber of the Year website, and if we're able to post some sample questions, we will definitely do that.
So Kelly, let me interject right here. Would some good advice on that be just to look at your application and use that to think of what sample questions might come about based on each of those questions?
Yeah, I think you're definitely going to get some questions from the application itself, and some of the content in there. You're going to get applications about current events and how your chamber is approaching or responding. You're going to get questions that deal with the Horizons Initiative, like we mentioned, and it's definitely not questions to stump you or to catch you in any way. It's really an opportunity for you to dig in a little bit deeper into the things that were in your application, because it's so many of those questions have such a word limit. And so it's kind of and I will say, I don't know if we mentioned this, but the interview is worth 2/3 of the final score. And it's really where the award is won and lost. And
if I can jump in there too. Sorry, I'm getting feedback. That's where I think past award winners can be a valuable external criteria for you. Everything Kelly said and all those resources are where the questions are going to be derived. But having some folks that have won the Chamber of the Year in your category as that external prep feedback circle, I think is important. We found that really effective to polishing our answers. I don't remember sitting here today the questions were asked. It's a blur, and you forget very soon once the adrenaline goes past. So you're not going to get verbatim questions, but you are going to get the general context and flow of what they were asked during their interview process. And I think that's an important way to practice to help you establish that flow. So I'd schedule a couple of those. Most folks that have won Chamber of the Year are happy to tell the story and happy to share. And so don't be afraid to reach out to past award winners in your category. I think that's an underutilized resource.
No, that's a great point, Adrian. And the questions do change from year to year. You might, if you're a finalist 2 years in a row, you might get a few of the same questions, but they definitely change them up each year, kind of depending on what the trends are. So great advice there. We had another question about the audit, and if the 2021 audit will not be completed by the deadline, is it acceptable to use 2020s? Absolutely. So it's your most recent, I believe. Is that right, Will? Yeah. Okay. So 2020 is acceptable, and a lot of the documentation that's required in that first section, if you do have any questions on if something is acceptable, feel free to reach out. But it's really, wanting the most up-to-date information. So sometimes it might have to go back a year. Any other questions, or Candace, anything else to add before we wrap up?
Well, the only thing I was thinking is just encouraging everybody not to wait to the last minute, because it's easy to do. Just pace yourself and take some time. Enjoy the process, because it's designed to be enjoyable. And I guess more than anything, good luck.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Candace. I mean, while you are waiting to find out if you qualify, if you qualify for the most part. You can, based on those qualifiers, you'll know if you're in that grouping. So don't wait until April 11th or whatever it is. Don't wait until the last minute to start. Definitely start thinking about it now. And it's such a fantastic process. I hope everyone does it. Just going through the process alone, it's kind of like if you've been through the accreditation process, you learn so much about your organization and where you might have things that you want to improve on, or where you could work on different areas of your organization. So I highly recommend it to everybody.
Kelly, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I'm in League City, and so I registered for the ACCE conference, and I see that starts on the 26th. Are there interviews going to be before? I'm just trying to see would there be any overlap, or how would we need to prepare to get there at a certain time?
So that's a great question. The interviews start first thing in the morning on the 26th. So where the conference, if you take part of any of the governance meetings, so if you're on the board or anything like that for ACCE, that starts in the afternoon, and these would be in the morning before that. So there's no overlap. You won't be missing anything, but it would require you to travel in really the day before, the evening before.
Right, that's what I was thinking about for my flight purposes.
You would want to, and I apologize for the sirens, they're really loud if you hear them. You would want to definitely get a good night's rest, because you'll find out the time of your interview just a couple weeks ahead of time. And it could be 8 a.m., it could be 9 a.m., it could be 10 a.m., it could be 11 a.m. It's usually on the hour. But you want to plan as if it could be 8 a.m. that morning. Good question. And I'll be there the night before, so it'll be a party now.
Will you buy us all a drink, Kelly?
Sure. If you can find me. No.
I'll be there.
Okay. Oh, and so thank you, Will. So the eligibility from the benchmarking data, Will went ahead and posted in here. Again, on the retention numbers, since it will be a little bit of a curve, we'll take the median number, and so that will be determined. But otherwise, everything else is pretty straightforward. All right, well, I think that's it. Be sure to get that survey done by April 1st. Plan on joining Candace and I and some of our other judges for a follow-up webinar on April 26th called Application Do's and Don'ts, and we'll break down the application in even more detail, provide more specific tips and tricks. Go ahead and download the application now and start gathering that information for your synopses, look at examples, and definitely reach out for help and guidance as needed. And with that, just thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye.